On the 30th of January 1944, at the Anzio beachhead in Italy, a tremor seized Headman Vera Hoffman's hand, the pencil in his grasp shaking as he leaned against the concrete wall of his command bunker, furiously documenting the spectacle he had just witnessed through the observation periscope. "The Americans," he wrote, "wielded artillery of a power beyond imagination. Bunker Louisa had simply ceased to be. 4 feet of reinforced concrete obliterated in a heartbeat. Through the choking clouds of smoke and dust, his gaze fell upon the vast crater where the strongpoint had stood sentinel for 8 months. The bunker, engineered by Wehrmacht standards to shrug off direct hits from 240mm shells, was deleted from existence by one solitary round from an American super-heavy gun, a phantom firing from far beyond the horizon. 32 men of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division had vanished, swallowed along with tons of concrete and steel. The instrument of this annihilation was the M1 240mm Howitzer, marking its combat debut with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. What Hoffman and thousands of German defenders were about to learn in the brutal months ahead was that every single assumption they held about fortification warfare had been rendered obsolete overnight. The U.S. Army had unleashed a weapon that could convert the most formidable bunker into a tomb with the cold certainty of mathematics. The M1 240mm Howitzer was born from a 1940 U.S. Army Ordnance study that arrived at a sobering conclusion. America's existing artillery was incapable of defeating modern European fortifications. The most powerful gun in their arsenal at the time, the 155mm Long Tom, could scar but not reliably eliminate the reinforced concrete bunkers that were becoming the bedrock of German defensive doctrine. The required specifications bordered on the fantastical, a mobile weapon that could hurl a 360-pound shell over 14 miles with enough accuracy to strike individual bunkers and the power to penetrate 6 feet of reinforced concrete. The entire apparatus needed to be transportable by standard military vehicles, a stark departure from the colossal railway guns of World War I. What was forged at the Watervliet Arsenal in New York was nothing short of an engineering masterpiece. Tipping the scales at 64,700 pounds in its firing position, the M1 demanded a crew of 14 men and, at peak efficiency, could unleash 1 round every 3 minutes. The barrel itself, weighing a staggering 23,000 pounds and stretching 35 feet long, required its own specialized transport on a 6-wheeled wagon. The average setup time was a grueling 8 hours, a process that included excavating a recoil pit and assembling the beast with the specialized M2 crane that was its constant companion. Production commenced in November 1942 with 6 pilot models. By 1944, the Watervliet Arsenal was churning out 13 of these giants per month, ultimately manufacturing precisely 315 units before the production lines fell silent in August 1945. Each gun carried a price tag of $380,000, the equivalent of 12 Sherman tanks, yet their strategic worth would prove to be incalculable. The 697th and 698th Field Artillery Battalions made their arrival at the Anzio beachhead in January 1944, introducing the first M1 240mm Howitzers to the theater of war. The German 14th Panzer Corps had meticulously converted the surrounding hills into a fortress, a web of interlocking bunkers that commanded every possible approach to the Allied positions. On January 30, 1944, at precisely 14:30 hours, the 697th fired the first 240mm round in anger, its target a German observation post nestled in the Alban Hills. The shell journeyed 23,000 yards, a flight of over 13 miles, and achieved a direct hit. The bunker, along with its sophisticated observation equipment and its crew, was erased from existence. Major Herman E. Smith, the commander of the 697th, chronicled the weapon's profound psychological impact in his unit's history. He noted that after their very first day of firing, German prisoners were reporting a complete collapse of morale within their units. They spoke of earthquake shells that made the very ground tremble for hundreds of meters around the point of impact. Many soldiers began to refuse orders to occupy bunkers after witnessing the power of these strikes. The cold arithmetic of destruction at Anzio was recorded with meticulous precision. 2,147 rounds fired, 67 bunkers engaged, 61 bunkers utterly destroyed. The average number of rounds per bunker was a mere 4.8, and the maximum range achieved was a staggering 25,100 yards. The war diary of the German 715th Infantry Division, captured after the liberation of Rome, grimly noted, "American super-heavy artillery renders our fortified positions untenable. The losses from a single one of their shells exceed those from an entire day of conventional bombardment." The breakthrough at Monte Cassino in May 1944 was a powerful demonstration of the 240mm Howitzer's singular ability to crack open the most stubborn defensive lines. The Gustav Line had held firm for months, repelling repeated Allied assaults, anchored by the ancient monastery that German paratroopers had transformed into an impregnable fortress. The 240th Field Artillery Battalion, armed with 8 M1 howitzers, joined Operation Diadem on May 11, 1944. From their positions near Aquino, they could touch every German position along the formidable Gustav Line. Their primary targets were the steel-reinforced bunkers embedded into the mountainside directly below the monastery. British Major General Francis Tucker, whose 4th Indian Division had suffered horrific casualties in previous assaults, witnessed the 240-meter bombardment firsthand and reported that the American super-heavy guns achieved what months of aerial bombing and conventional artillery had utterly failed to do. Each round that found its mark completely eradicated a German strongpoint. The 697th Field Artillery Battalion, veterans of Anzio and the drive to Rome, positioned their howitzers in the valleys below the Gothic Line in September 1944. By employing high-angle fire, they could drop shells almost vertically onto German positions that had been carved into the reverse slopes of the mountains. The destruction of the Futa Pass fortifications was a stark demonstration of the weapon's capabilities. The pass, which controlled the main route to Bologna, was defended by elaborate bunker complexes constructed by Organization Todt. On September 16, 1944, the 697th commenced a systematic bombardment of these positions. Private First Class Donald Matthews, an ammunition handler with the 697th, wrote in a letter home, "The shells go up so high they just disappear into the clouds. Then they come straight down on the German bunkers. The explosion shakes the entire mountain. After we hit a bunker, there's nothing left at all but a crater." The Futa Pass fell in just 5 days. German casualties from collapsing bunkers far exceeded those from direct combat. The war diary of the 4th Parachute Division recorded, "American super-heavy shells are penetrating overhead cover that we previously thought was adequate. Morale is collapsing as troops now refuse to occupy the fortifications." The systematic dismantling of the Siegfried Line, beginning in September 1944, represented the 240mm Howitzer's greatest contribution to the Allied victory. The West Wall was a formidable obstacle stretching 390 miles from the Netherlands to Switzerland and comprising over 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and fortified positions constructed between 1936 and 1940. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion brought their M1 howitzers to the Siegfried Line near Aachen in September 1944. The fortifications they confronted were daunting. Type 10 bunkers with walls 3 to 4 feet thick, command bunkers with walls 8 feet thick, and infantry positions with interlocking fields of fire. The first major test came at the Scharnhorst Line, an extension of the Siegfried Line defending Aachen. On October 8, 1944, the 265th began preparatory fires for the 1st Infantry Division's assault. In a mere 6 hours, they fired 238 rounds, destroying 19 of the 22 targeted bunkers. Corporal Robert Williams, a forward observer with the 16th Infantry Regiment, witnessed the bombardment. Each 240mm hit was like a small earthquake, he recalled. Concrete bunkers we had been told would take days to reduce were just gone in minutes. The Germans inside never stood a chance. This same pattern of destruction repeated itself all across the entire front. The 278th Field Artillery Battalion, supporting V Corps, destroyed 73 bunkers in the Schnee-Eifel region during December 1944. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion, operating near Metz, eliminated the entire fortress ring around the city in November 1944, firing over 3,000 rounds in just 2 weeks. The Vosges Mountains campaign from October to November 1944 presented a unique set of challenges. German forces had fortified the heavily forested ridges with bunkers perfectly camouflaged by thick tree cover, making them invisible to aerial reconnaissance and protected from conventional artillery by the terrain. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion developed new techniques for forest warfare. Using proximity-fused shells when they were available, they could achieve airbursts above the tree canopy, with the blast effects penetrating downward onto the bunkers. When using conventional shells, they employed box and one tactics: 4 rounds at the corners of a suspected position, followed by one directly in the center. Master Sergeant Harold Anderson, a chief of section with the 265th, described the technique. The forest made observation difficult, but the 240mm didn't always need precision. Even a near miss would collapse bunkers through ground shock alone. We'd fire, wait for the dust to settle, and the infantry would advance to find nothing but craters and bodies. The liberation of Strasbourg on November 23, 1944, was preceded by a 240mm bombardment of its outer fortifications. The German 553rd Infantry Division abandoned their positions after losing 12 bunkers in just 90 minutes of targeted fire. Post-war analysis by U.S. Army engineers revealed precisely why the 240mm Howitzer proved so devastatingly effective against fortifications. The concrete-piercing shell, designated M107, used a hardened steel cap backed by 360 pounds of mass traveling at 2,300 feet per second. This delivered approximately 2.8 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy to an impact area of less than 20 inches. The resulting pressure, exceeding 200,000 psi, surpassed the compression strength of any concrete. Even more critically, the delayed fuse allowed the shell to penetrate 3 to 6 feet before detonation. The subsequent explosion inside the concrete mass created what engineers termed sympathetic fracturing. Shock, waves reflecting off the steel. Reinforcement created complex stress patterns that shattered entire structures from within. The high-explosive shell, designated M114, contained 49 pounds of TNT with aluminum powder additives, which increased its blast effect by 40% over pure TNT. When fused for a surface burst, it could create craters 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep in average soil, or 30 feet wide and 12 feet deep in rocky ground. The deployment of 240mm howitzers demanded an extraordinary level of logistical support that showcased American organizational capabilities. Each battalion required a daily supply of 50 to 100 shells, weighing between 18 and 36 tons, 2,000 gallons of fuel for prime movers and generators, specialized maintenance equipment, and dedicated ammunition carriers with reinforced suspensions. The ammunition supply chain stretched all the way from the Watervliet arsenal to the front lines, sometimes covering a distance of 3,000 miles. Each shell was a product of precision manufacturing. The forging of the shell body, machining to tolerances of 0.01 inches, careful filling with explosive compounds, installation of precision fuses, and individual inspection and proof testing. By March 1945, the U.S. Army had stockpiled over 500,000 240mm rounds in European depots. Monthly consumption peaked at 35,000 rounds during the Rhine crossings. This represented an industrial capacity that Germany, Japan, or even the Soviet Union simply could not match. The Rhine crossing operations of March 1945 demonstrated the 240mm howitzer at its absolute peak of effectiveness. Operation Plunder, Montgomery's set-piece crossing on March 23-24, was preceded by the largest artillery preparation of the Western War. The American 14th Corps contributed 12,000 240mm howitzers to the bombardment. The target was the Wesel fortified zone, where the German 84th Infantry Division had constructed elaborate bunker systems along the east bank. Beginning at 1700 hours on March 23, The 240mm Howitzers began the systematic destruction of identified positions. Captain William Morrison, commanding Battery B of the 278th Field Artillery Battalion, recorded, "We had aerial photographs showing every single bunker. Starting from the north, we worked our way south, engaging each position with 4 to 6 rounds. By midnight, we had destroyed 31 bunkers and damaged 12 more. The crossing met with minimal resistance. German survivors reported complete demoralization after watching their fortifications disintegrate before their eyes. The 84th Division's strength returns showed 2,400 casualties from artillery alone, with most of those coming from bunker collapses. The encirclement of Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket, from April 1st to 18th, 1945, saw 240mm Howitzers reducing industrial facilities that had been converted into fortresses. German forces had fortified factories, using their reinforced concrete industrial structures as defensive positions. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion supported the reduction of the pocket's northern sector. The Krupp Steel Works in Essen, fortified with additional concrete reinforcement, was targeted on April 9th. 240mm rounds transformed the main factory buildings into twisted rubble. Staff Sergeant James Peterson, a forward observer with the 313th Infantry Regiment, witnessed the destruction. These weren't normal buildings. They were industrial fortresses with walls 3 feet thick. The 240mm shells went through them like they were tissue paper. The psychological effect on the defenders was total. They surrendered in masses after seeing what happened to the Krupp Works. Army Group B, initially 430,000 strong, surrendered after just 18 days. Intelligence reports credited the rapid collapse partially to the systematic destruction of fortified positions by super-heavy artillery, which had convinced the defenders that any further resistance was futile. The WWII arsenal's production of 240mm Howitzers represented American industrial mobilization at its finest. The facility, established in 1813, had become America's premier large-caliber gun factory by World War II. The production statistics tell the story. November 1942, 6 pilot models. 1943, 72 units, for a monthly average of 6. 1944, 158 units, a monthly average of 13. January to August 1945, 79 units, a monthly average of 10. The total production was 315 units. The workforce peaked at 9,100 employees working 3 shifts 7 days a week. Women comprised 35% of this workforce, performing precision machining operations that had previously been considered impossible for female workers. The arsenal's monthly payroll exceeded $3 million, making it the Capital District's largest employer. Each gun barrel required 65 tons of special steel, 847 individual machining operations, 72 hours of precision boring, heat treatment in furnaces reaching 1,500 degrees, and individual proof firing with overpressure charges. The quality control was exceptional. Of the 315 guns produced, only 2 failed acceptance testing, both due to minor recoil mechanism issues that were quickly corrected. No M1 240mm howitzer ever failed catastrophically in combat. American production of 240mm ammunition defied German comprehension. The WWII arsenal alone was producing 2,000 rounds monthly by 1944. Additional production at Picatinny Arsenal and civilian contractors brought the total monthly production to 10,000 rounds by early 1945. Each round represented a masterpiece of mass production. The shell body forged from 4140 chrome molybdenum steel, machined to tolerances of plus or minus 0.001 inches, filled with 49 pounds of grade A TNT, fitted with precision-machined rotating bands, and individually gauged and inspected. The logistics chain delivered this ammunition with remarkable efficiency. Liberty ships carried 240mm rounds as deck cargo, with each ship transporting up to 500 rounds. The Red Ball Express truck convoys included specialized ammunition sections with reinforced vehicles designed for the 360-pound shells. By April 1945, U.S. forces in Europe had expended 118,429 rounds of 240mm ammunition, while still maintaining theater reserves exceeding 100,000 rounds. This profligate expenditure, impossible for any other belligerent, multiplied the weapon's psychological impact. Operating the M1 240mm Howitzer demanded exceptional teamwork and physical endurance. Each 14-man crew functioned as a precisely coordinated team, with every member essential to the weapon's operation. The crew positions included the chief of section, an NCO commanding the piece, the gunner, responsible for laying the weapon, the assistant gunner who operated the breech, numbers 3 to 8, the ammunition handlers, numbers 9 to 10, who operated the M2 crane, numbers 11 to 12, the powder handlers, and numbers 13 to 14, the vehicle drivers and security. Loading the weapon required extraordinary coordination. The 360-pound projectile was lifted by the crane, guided by 4 men into the breech, and then rammed home hydraulically. The powder charge, consisting of up to 8 separate bags, was loaded behind the shell. The entire process took a mere 90 seconds for a well-trained crew. Private First Class Michael Sullivan, an ammunition handler with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion, described the physical demands. After 10 rounds, everyone was completely exhausted. The concussion from firing was like being punched in the chest. We rotated positions every hour just to maintain efficiency, but knowing what our shells did to the German bunkers was what kept us motivated. The forward observers who directed the 240mm fire held one of the war's most dangerous jobs. Positioned with frontline infantry, often beyond friendly lines, they identified targets and adjusted fire with lethal precision. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, a forward observer with the 265th Field Artillery Battalion, survived 187 days in combat. His personal record included directing the destruction of 47 German bunkers. In a 1985 interview, he reflected, "Calling in 240mm was like summoning Thor's hammer. I'd identify a bunker, radio the coordinates, and minutes later it would simply cease to exist." The power was intoxicating, but it was also very sobering. Each shell might kill dozens of enemy soldiers. The observer's equipment included a BC scope with 20x magnification, an M1 plotting board, an SCR-610 radio, a 48-pound backpack unit, a map case with aerial photographs, a compass, and a rangefinder. The psychological burden was significant. Forward observers could see the human cost of their actions through their scopes. German soldiers fleeing from bunkers, the wounded, the dead. Many reported having nightmares for decades after the war. Captured German documents and post-war interviews revealed the sheer terror inspired by the 240mm bombardment. The Wehrmacht's experience fighting the Soviets, who relied on massed artillery barrages, had not prepared them for American precision firepower. A November 1944 report from the German 7th Army, captured at Metz, stated, "Enemy super-heavy artillery represents a new form of warfare. Individual bunkers are engaged with observed fire of extreme accuracy. Casualties from single shells exceed those from a conventional barrage. The morale effect is catastrophic. Troops are refusing to occupy forward bunkers." The German 19th Army, defending the Vosges, reported that 60% of their casualties came from artillery, with 240mm fire causing disproportionate losses despite its limited volume. Bunkers that had protected troops for months became death traps the moment American observers identified them. Post-war interviews with German veterans consistently emphasized the psychological impact. Former Oberst Heinrich Ziemers, who commanded a regiment in the Siegfried Line, stated in 1962, "Regular artillery we could endure, but those monster shells simply broke our spirit. When you saw a bunker disappear, you understood that nowhere was safe. Many of my men shot themselves rather than wait for the next shell." The M1 240mm Howitzer was part of an Allied super-heavy artillery force that included British and Soviet weapons, but it was American industrial capacity that made the difference. A comparison of production figures is telling. U.S. M1 240mm Howitzer, 315 units. British BL 7.2-inch howitzer 36 units, Soviet 200mm Platin Bur 5 mortar 47 units, German 24mm K3 railway gun 8 units. The American advantage lay not just in quantity, but in mobility and sustained operations. While German and Soviet super-heavy guns required rail transport or extensive site preparation, the M1 could be towed, albeit slowly, by tracked vehicles and emplaced anywhere with suitable ground. British observers consistently praised American super-heavy artillery. Major General Sidney Kirkman, the artillery commander for the 3 Corps, wrote, "The American 240mm Howitzer achieved what our own heavy guns could not: the systematic and rapid destruction of fortified positions. At Cassino, these weapons were largely responsible for the breakthrough." As Allied forces drove into Germany proper in early 1945, the 240mm Howitzer continued its destructive work. Every German city designated a fortress by Hitler faced systematic bombardment by super-heavy artillery. The Siege of Aschaffenburg, from March 25 to April 3, 1945, demonstrated the weapon's urban warfare capabilities. The German 36th Infantry Division had fortified the medieval city, barricading streets and converting buildings into strong points. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion positioned 4 howitzers across the main river and systematically destroyed the defensive positions. The precision was remarkable. Forward observers could place 240mm rounds through specific buildings without damaging adjacent structures. This selective destruction convinced many German commanders to surrender rather than see their cities leveled. The capture of Nuremberg, from April 16 to 20, 1945, saw 3 240mm battalions in action. The medieval fortifications, reinforced with modern concrete, crumbled under the bombardment. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion destroyed 8 major bunkers in the old city walls in just 4 hours of firing on April 19. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, American 240mm howitzers had made a decisive contribution to the victory. The final statistics from U.S. Army Ordnance are stark. Total rounds fired in the ETO, 1/18,429. Bunkers, fortifications engaged, 3,847. Confirmed destroyed, 3,114, 81%. Damaged beyond use, 489, 13%. Rounds per target destroyed, 38, average. Maximum range achieved in combat, 25,255 yards. Gun tube replacements required, 23. Catastrophic failures, 0. The human cost inflicted by 240mm fire is harder to quantify. German records, often incomplete, suggest 15,000 to 20,000 casualties directly from 240mm bombardment, with psychological casualties possibly doubling that figure. Combat experience led to continuous improvements in 240mm howitzer employment. Early operations revealed that the 8-hour emplacement time limited tactical flexibility. By 1945, experienced crews had reduced the setup time to under 4 hours through improved procedures and equipment. The development of mechanical fuse setters increased the rate of fire from 1 round per 3 minutes to 1 per 2 minutes for sustained operations. Improved powder formulations extended barrel life from 500 to 800 rounds between replacements. The most significant innovation was the integration of photo reconnaissance with fire planning. By 1945, forward observers were receiving annotated aerial photographs showing every potential target, numbered and gridded. This reduced mission processing time from 10 minutes to under 4. While this narrative focuses on European operations, 240mm howitzers did see limited service in the Pacific. 6 weapons supported the Philippines campaign, destroying Japanese fortifications on Corregidor in February 1945. The concrete-piercing shells proved especially effective against Japanese cave fortifications, sealing entrances and creating concussion casualties deep inside the mountains. Plans existed for an extensive 240mm deployment in Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan. The U.S. Army projected requirements for 100 howitzers to reduce the Japanese homeland fortifications, Japan's surrender made this unnecessary, but captured Japanese officers later admitted that their defensive plans had not accounted for American super-heavy artillery capabilities. Military historians consider the M1 240mm Howitzer a revolutionary weapon that fundamentally changed siege warfare. Its combination of mobility, accuracy, and destructive power rendered traditional fortifications obsolete. The U.S. Army's official history concluded, the 240mm Howitzer provided the ground forces with a capability previously reserved for naval gunfire or strategic bombing. It could destroy any fortification with surgical precision, profoundly affecting both the physical and psychological dimensions of warfare. Soviet observers, given access to captured German fortifications, were particularly impressed. Marshal Vasily Chuikov, who had commanded at Stalingrad, examined destroyed Siegfried Line bunkers and commented, "The Americans found the solution to modern fortifications. Not mass, but precision. One gun achieving what 100 of ours could not." The terror inspired by 240mm bombardment left lasting psychological scars. The German Veterans Association documented high rates of specific phobias among survivors. Seismophobia, fear of vibrations, 73% of bunker survivors. Claustrophobia, 67%. Phonophobia, fear of loud sounds, 89%. Dr. Hans Müller, treating veterans in Munich during the 1950s, identified bunker syndrome, a complex of symptoms including nightmares, panic attacks, and an inability to enter concrete structures. His research suggested that the sudden, complete destruction of supposedly safe positions created unique trauma patterns. American veterans also carried psychological burdens. Forward observers reported recurring dreams about calling in fire missions. Gun crews described permanent hearing damage despite protective equipment. The physical sensation of firing, the ground shock, the chest compression, and the overwhelming sound remained vivid for decades. The successful deployment of 240mm howitzers represented American industrial philosophy, the mass production of precision weapons. While Germany produced individual masterpieces like the Karl Gerät 600mm mortar, 6 built, or the Schwerer Gustav 800mm railway gun, 2 built, America mass-produced effective weapons. The comparison is instructive. A German 600mm Karl Gerät, 6 produced 24-hour setup, 1 round per 10 minutes. An American 240mm M1, 315 produced, 4-hour setup, 1 round per 2 minutes. This represented fundamentally different approaches to warfare. Germany sought Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons, that would provide a decisive advantage through technological superiority. America sought producible weapons that would provide an advantage through quantity and reliability. The 240mm howitzer program cost approximately $120 million, $1945, including development, production, and ammunition. This was equal to the cost of 40 B-24 bombers or 1,600 Sherman tanks. Yet the strategic impact, the ability to reduce any fortification quickly, justified the investment. The M1 240mm howitzer's influence extended beyond World War II. Its success demonstrated the value of super-heavy mobile artillery, influencing Cold War weapon development. The Soviet Union developed the 2S4 Tulpan 240mm self-propelled mortar, citing American World War II experience. The fire control techniques developed for the 240mm, particularly the FDC system, and the integration of aerial reconnaissance, became standard for all artillery. Modern GPS-guided munitions trace their conceptual ancestry to the precision fire missions of 1944-45. Several M1 howitzers survive as monuments. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, displays serial number 14, which fired the first combat round at Anzio. The Watervliet Arsenal Museum preserves number 1, the prototype that proved super-heavy mobile artillery was possible. The M1 240mm Howitzer achieved something rare in military history. It rendered an entire category of military architecture obsolete. For centuries, fortifications had provided a defensive advantage. Concrete and steel bunkers represented the ultimate expression of this philosophy. The 240mm Howitzer ended that era in 18 months of combat. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in his post-war memoir, wrote, "The 240mm Howitzer gave us the ability to crack any defensive position quickly and economically. It saved thousands of Allied lives by eliminating fortifications that would have required costly infantry assaults." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who defended Italy and later southern Germany, offered the enemy's perspective. The American 240mm gun was a weapon against which we had no answer. Our bunkers, built at enormous cost in materials and labor, became death traps. The psychological effect was devastating. Troops lost faith in any defensive position. Behind the statistics were the individual soldiers whose service brought victory. Their stories, preserved in unit histories and personal memoirs, humanized the mechanical destruction. Sergeant David E. Mathesy of the 697th Field Artillery Battalion served from Anzio through the war's end, participating in the destruction of over 100 enemy positions. In a 1990 interview, he reflected, "We knew we had something special. When the infantry called for us, we could eliminate obstacles that had stopped entire divisions. But we also knew every shell might kill dozens of enemy soldiers. It was necessary, but it wasn't easy." Lieutenant Harold Saunders of the 272nd Field Artillery Battalion directed fire during the Normandy breakout. His forward observer team spent 73 consecutive days in combat, calling in missions that destroyed 31 German strongpoints. The 240mm was our ace in the hole. When nothing else worked, when the Germans thought they were safe, we could reach out and touch them. It saved American lives, and that's what mattered. These men, and thousands like them, operated weapons of unprecedented destructive power with professional precision. They transformed American industrial might into battlefield victory, one devastating round at a time. German tactical doctrine evolved rapidly in response to the 240mm bombardment, though no truly effective countermeasure ever emerged. By late 1944, Wehrmacht defensive instructions emphasized dispersion and camouflage over fortification. The German 7th Army's December 1944 tactical directive stated, "Fixed fortifications must be abandoned when American super-heavy artillery is present. Troops should construct field positions, frequently relocated, with overhead cover sufficient only for conventional artillery. Bunkers concentrate casualties rather than preventing them." This represented a complete reversal of German defensive doctrine, developed over decades. The Prussian tradition of elaborate field fortifications, refined through World War I and the Eastern Front, crumbled before American firepower. Some German innovations showed promise. Dummy positions, heated to simulate occupation, sometimes drew fire away from actual positions. Smoke generators obscured observation. Electronic jamming attempted to disrupt American radio communications. But these measures only delayed the inevitable. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, summarized the German frustration. "We could accept being outproduced. That was expected, fighting America. But the precision of their heavy artillery made every defensive position vulnerable. We were not just outgunned, but outclassed." Operating the 240mm howitzers extracted a price from American forces as well. Gun crews suffered extensive hearing damage. Post-war Veterans Administration studies found that 90% of 240mm veterans had significant hearing loss. The concussion from firing caused chronic traumatic encephalopathy in some long-service crew members. Forward observers suffered the highest casualty rates of any artillery specialty. Of the 127 forward observers trained for 240mm battalions, 31 were killed and 43 wounded, a 58% casualty rate. Their exposed positions and the value the Germans placed on eliminating them made survival unlikely. Mechanical failures, while rare, could be catastrophic. On March 3, 1945, a premature detonation in the bore of a 240mm Howitzer near Prüm killed 5 crew members. An investigation revealed a faulty fuse, leading to improved quality control procedures. The logistical burden was immense. Each 240mm battalion required 67 vehicles, including specialized prime movers, cranes, and ammunition carriers. Fuel consumption averaged 2,000 gallons daily when on the move. The weapon's weight damaged roads, requiring engineer support to maintain supply routes. The M1 240mm Howitzer represented American warfare philosophy at its most effective. Overwhelming firepower delivered with precision, backed by unlimited industrial production. While individual German bunkers might have been stronger, American industry could destroy them faster than Germany could build them. This mathematical certainty of victory through production terrified German commanders more than any tactical defeat. They could counter superior generalship with clever tactics and offset numerical disadvantage with superior training. But they could not answer unlimited precision firepower backed by an infinite supply of ammunition. The 240mm Howitzer was, ultimately, a manifestation of American industrial democracy defeating European totalitarianism. Free workers in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Watervliet produced weapons that destroyed fortifications built by slave labor. The triumph was not just military, but moral, proof that democratic societies could marshal greater power than dictatorships. The German encounter with American 240mm howitzers was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological transformation through technological shock. Soldiers who had believed in the supremacy of German engineering, the impregnability of concrete fortifications, and the advantage of a prepared defense discovered that American industrial capacity had rendered their entire military doctrine obsolete. The numbers tell only part of the story. 315 howitzers produced, 1/18 hour 129 rounds fired, 114 bunkers destroyed. The true impact was measured in the complete collapse of German faith in fixed defenses. Every shattered bunker demonstrated American superiority, not just in firepower, but in every aspect of modern warfare: logistics, production, technology, and organization. The 240mm howitzer did more than destroy fortifications. It demolished the psychological foundations of German resistance. Wehrmacht soldiers learned to fear not just the shell, but everything it represented: unlimited ammunition, precision fire control, mechanical reliability, and the terrible efficiency of American industrial democracy. In the ruins of the Siegfried Line lay not just broken concrete, but the shattered remnants of Nazi Germany's military pretensions. The thunder of the 220mm howitzer was the sound of American industrial might proclaiming inevitable victory. Every German soldier who heard it understood its terrible meaning. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy and lost. The terror would echo long after the guns fell silent. Veterans would spend decades trying to process the trauma of watching their supposedly impregnable fortifications vanish in clouds of pulverized concrete. But from that terror came transformation. The recognition that the age of fixed fortifications had ended, and with it, any military doctrine based on static defense. The M1 240mm howitzer had spoken with the voice of American industry, and its message was unmistakable. In modern industrial warfare, there is no defensive position that cannot be destroyed, no fortification that cannot be breached, no bunker that cannot become a tomb. The Germans were not simply terrified when US 240mm howitzers obliterated their fortresses. They were transformed by the revelation of an American power that made resistance genuinely futile. In the end, the greatest victory of the 240mm howitzer was not the fortifications it destroyed, but the minds it changed. German soldiers who had begun the war believing in their technological superiority ended it, understanding that they had been overwhelmed by an industrial democracy that could transform raw materials into precision weapons faster than totalitarianism, could build concrete walls. The thunder of the 240mm Howitzer was democracy's answer to tyranny.